Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My partner in life, Marion Krefeldt, and I are going to be talking this morning on the topic, Your Good Health is a Workforce Issue. And our goals in this talk, first and foremost, to keep you from having to experience what we have been through now in the past roughly 18 months as we have been dealing with cancer. I was diagnosed in February of last year. Reduce the stigma of talking about cancer, because not talking about cancer can be deadly. With this talk intended largely for professionals in the information technology area, I want to talk about some lessons in health management that are applicable to all of us. Let me just give everybody a little bit of a timeline here. In July of 2012, I was a general chair of the Exceed 12 conference, the predecessor to PEARC. And it was my sad duty in the opening session for Exceed 12 to announce that one of the beloved members of the cyberinfrastructure community, Alan Snavely, was not going to be there to speak or present that week because he had died the previous weekend of a heart attack. This was the second year in a row that the TerraGrid Exceed PEARC conference series began with the announcement of the death of one of its community leaders the week before the conference. Maybe I should have caught on to something then. Fast forward, did lots of good work, became PI of the Jetstream system, went through a zero-based budget process at IU, wrote lots of papers, and in January 2017, Marion says, sit down, we need to talk. This is never a good thing, of course. Marion said, you go to the bathroom too many times a day, you need to go see a doctor. So I went and saw a doctor. Doctor said, you know, we need to do colonoscopy. You might have some colitis, might have some other digestive issues, but based on your symptoms, one thing this probably is not is cancer. So I schedule a colonoscopy for February 13th, and surprise, you have cancer. About 60 seconds into the colonoscopy, there was a tumor in my insides that was just as clear as could be. So we go home, change clothes, go back to the hospital, get CT scans, and on February 14th, 2017, the worst Valentine's Day ever, we get the staging information. It's stage 4, it's already in my liver. February 28th, quickly ahead to starting chemotherapy. April 21st, worst wedding anniversary ever. I made it through the chemo in reasonably good shape, all things considered. But I did have a fairly high severity, low likelihood complication. The tumor in my colon swelled up to a point that it shut off my colon. So we spent the week that was supposed to end in our wedding anniversary with me in the hospital. And on our anniversary day, the 21st, Marion was pacing around the waiting room while I was having a colonoscopy and having a stent put in my inside so that my insides went end to end and worked again. June 20th, one more round of the same thing, but this time at least we knew what we were doing and the process of managing the complications was pretty straightforward. July 20th, surgery. Surgery lasted 8 hours. They took out a big chunk of my liver. They took out part of my rectum. They took out part of my colon. And it took me about 6 weeks to bounce back. I went back on chemotherapy. October 11th was the end of chemotherapy. And through all of this, I managed pretty well, reasonably, in terms of health, ability to work, buoyed by blind faith in my doctors and my wife. But to give you a sense of what it was really like to live through that time period, let me turn the floor over to my life partner, Marion.
It's hard to understand how serious health issues can be unless you have experienced them yourself. But to give you a sense of what the consequences of cancer are, let me pick up the story from my side of this experience as of the 13th of February of 2017. It was easily the most horrible day in all the years that Craig and I have shared. I remember sitting in the waiting room of the office where Craig had his procedure. The TV was playing some sort of soap opera, I think. The hours felt like days. I read something on my Kindle, I have no idea what. A staff member fetches me to bring me back to Craig's room. She does not really look at me after calling my name. She just looks at the floor. I sensed a shadow. Please, oh please, just let it be something simple. Instead, the first words out of Craig's mouth were, I have cancer. I have colon cancer. I am so sorry. I remember going numb, just numb, before feeling this deep sense of despair. I inhale to the lowest part of my body, but I cannot exhale, probably never again. Nevertheless, the despair gives way to fear, pure fear, the kind that makes your legs buckle while you're trying not to throw up. After further testing and meeting with an oncologist the next day, I hear numbers, stage 4, 20%, 5%, 5 years. I'm sure other things were discussed, but I have no real recollection of the conversation, just the numbers. I left there thinking, I hate this place. I hate this place. The lights are buzzing, the carpet is dingy, I just hate it. I'm not sure if any of this was actually the case, but better to focus on that than the message, at least for the moment. I feel hot and cold, I cannot sleep, cancer, Craig, I will be alone. I have no idea how to make that work. Never mind about me. What about our kids? While they are already adults, they dearly love their dad, teenage years notwithstanding. Then there are the grandkids who adore their opa. I think they're all, of all the crazy hours Craig and I have worked, but in the last few years, particularly Craig. From my perspective, his health deteriorated slowly, much like the fable of the frog in the boiling pot. I rewind our conversations concerning his work schedule and his health. High blood pressure, high blood sugar, digestive issues. I would mention these symptoms and the increase in severity frequently. Our conversation follows a pattern. They were predictable. There's a grant proposal I must write, a paper I must edit. I must prepare for this talk today. There's a conference I must attend, a personnel issue I must solve. I knew at some point something would lower the boom. Well, cancer does that, quite effectively and immediately. Somewhere along the line, my fear turned to fight. Fight with a thick layer of cortisol and adrenaline. The kind that makes your head buzz and your tongue feel thick and makes you itch all over. Nothing makes it stop, not sleep, not wine, not more wine, not showering, nothing. Call somebody, I said. Do something. Don't just stand there. We're going to Indianapolis, or MD Anderson, or Dana-Farber, someplace. How do we tell our kids? We procrastinate, that's how. We tell ourselves we need to digest this information before we talk about it to them. Then we procrastinate some more. I tell our daughter. She just sits down on the floor in her kitchen and weeps. Craig tells our son. He is completely distraught as well. Why Craig, they ask. Why not some rapist, murderer, or terrorist? Cancer does not discriminate. It does not care if you contribute to society or take away from it. Cancer is very unscrupulous and very, very smart. Smarter than any of us, we say. Running buddies. I have running buddies. The 17th of February is a Friday. We run on Friday mornings. The car pulls up to the house to fetch me on the way out to the trail. Please pull around the corner, I say to my buddies. I do not want Craig to see me fall apart again. I share the news, share the numbers. I don't know if we were silent on the drive to the trail. I have no real recollection of that conversation. I just remember the numbers, and the odds are that Craig is going to leave me. Running is good for my body and my soul. Running with friends is good for everything. Our little group of 4 running ladies has run through a divorce, death of several parents, and a case of multiple myeloma. I guess we add colorectal cancer to the list. Anyway, by now Craig and I have a plan. We are going to the IU Simon Cancer Center. I don't know if it's going to be better or worse, but it will at least be different. Maybe there the lights won't buzz. Maybe the carpet won't be dingy. And maybe the numbers will be better. Or on the other hand, maybe they will tell us, go on a long vacation and enjoy yourself. Craig drives, I cannot. Actually, I remember thinking, I can't do this. I cannot do any of this. However, about halfway to the IU Simon Cancer Center, it occurs to me, I really don't have a choice in the matter. I remember seeing a card in a Starbucks, the caption of which was, yes, life sucks sometimes. So put your big girl panties on and fake it or make it. I decide, yes, I can fake it. On the drive to Indianapolis, I make it a point to enjoy the view of the river. For the first time in days, I notice that the sun is shining. Maybe it has for days. The oncologist says, I'm glad you came in while we still have something to work with. At that very moment, I moved from faking it to making it. I will become the best caretaker ever, I tell myself. I felt like I was just promoted to a job with high stakes for which I am not the least bit qualified. But I have confidence. I got this, you damn cancer, you. With the help of a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, our children, my family, and many friends here and abroad, I started to re-enter my life. Slowly, tenuously, but forever looking over my shoulder, always anticipating more bad news or complications. In retrospect, I think I also became somewhat agoraphobic. I only left the house when I needed to. I only read email every few days, not knowing how to or not having the energy to answer all the well-wishers. This was probably not the best approach, but most people stuck with me. The first complications, as you have heard from Craig, came just before our anniversary. So we needed to make it from Bloomington to Indianapolis as soon as possible. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. Indiana Highway 37, which connects Bloomington and Indianapolis, was bumper to bumper during miles and miles of construction. I got us from Bloomington to Methodist Hospital in 55 minutes, driving through and around orange cones and sometimes in the median. I thought, if the police stops me, good for us, they will give us an escort. I don't think I've ever driven this recklessly in my entire life. We have had another occasion like that, but as Craig said, this time it was much less dramatic. Then somewhere in the summer, we received the news that Craig's surgery would be in July rather than in October. We're to stay for 8 days. Craig's surgery was the Friday before the NASCAR Brickyard 400 race in Indianapolis. Almost all hotel rooms are booked. So I stay in some nondescript hotel at the airport. Our daughter joins me. So does my mother-in-law. Our son had scheduled a family vacation. Go, just go, we say. Cancer cannot take everything away from us. The night before the surgery, we are in the hotel room. Craig falls in the bathtub. I go back from making it to faking it. Not very well either. The surgery is long, 8 hours instead of 3. But at the end, the surgeons are optimistic. On day 2 after surgery, we talk and walk, and we have walked almost every day since. There are 8 more weeks of chemo sessions after surgery. Craig rings the bell at the infusion center, signifying the end of the chemo. The preceding 9 months have been awful, just awful. It is hard to watch a person you love be afraid and suffer so much physical pain. I probably remember the pain better than Craig. Pain and painkillers both produce a pleasant brain fog. The next surgery was November 30th. The purpose of this surgery was to reverse the ileostomy that Craig had been given. In comparison to everything else, this seemed like a cakewalk. We had to stay close to the IU Cancer Center in case there were complications, but that was not a big deal. This time, however, there also was not a hotel room available in Indianapolis, but our social worker connected us to an organization called Fairhaven, which provides apartments close to campus for cancer patients. They provided us this nice small apartment just a short walk from the hospital. We celebrated my 60th birthday there. In 2017, there was not a single celebration or holiday that was not impacted somehow by cancer. It was also the first year in 35 years that we have not left Indiana. I was not able to visit my parents who live in Germany and are in their 90s. And my dad can't hear, so telephoning is not really an option. I also did not take care of myself as well as I should have. I have not had a physical, a mammogram, a colonoscopy. How crazy is that? It only occurred to me that I had not done any of this when I was going through our medical receipts for tax purposes. I have always heard that it is harder being a caretaker than being sick. I really don't know about that, but it sure is not a cakewalk. The sacrifices do not become clear until the immediate crises are over. It has become clear to me that no one can be this sick all by themselves, and no caretaker can be well throughout this process without professional help. There is no shame in that. I've had to rely more on my family and friends' support than I have ever thought possible. And that does not always feel comfortable. It is counter my nature. I think what saved my sanity were just a few simple things, and this is in order. My love for Craig, anti-anxiety medication, our kids who were omnipresent, on the phone and in person at the infusion center. A brother I knew I could call at 2 a.m. any day, and I did that a lot, always in tears and desperate for answers, of which there were none. Exercise, mostly with my running buddies. Without them, I am sure my head would have exploded at some point. My Kindle and mindless reading of simple novels that took me to places I now cannot even remember. Moreover, I believe I have identified important issues that I must continue to work on. I'm a realist, more of an optimist. A little bit of optimism really goes a long way. It is okay to deselect people in your environment who are not helpful, or worse, a drain on the system. I must remember how fortunate we really are in this unfortunate situation. We have a lovely family, great friends in many countries, great medical care, good insurance, the time and opportunity to heal without having to worry about keeping a roof over our heads. I have a friend who has had cancer twice. She says cancer families live their lives 90 days at a time for the first 2 years. Then we get 180 days for the next 3 years. She is correct. The language has already crept into our daily conversation without much fanfare. If the next checkup is okay, we will register for a half marathon. If the tumor count stays below 3.0, if the this, then the that. If not, go back to the beginning or some version thereof. I'm really not good at any of this. I must do my best to enjoy the here and now for what it is and keep my fear of what may be lurking around the next corner from stealing time away from us. This sounded like a platitude at one time. Now I try to make it my mantra. My success rate is about 50-50. Am I a good caretaker? I don't know. Probably no better or worse than anyone else. A brochure at the Cancer Center said, I would embark on a rewarding journey. Seriously, who writes these things? A rewarding journey for me involves a beach vacation or a trip to Italy. Caretaking is life-disrupting, frustrating, painful, depressing, exhausting, frightening. I have learned a lot about how medical institutions are run. What you need to say to get your insurance company to actually provide the coverage that you bought, and the many, many loopholes and exceptions in medical insurance coverage. I have filled out dozens of forms, signed documents without knowing what they say, and on more than one occasion wanted to storm into a hospital kitchen with a plate of food they delivered that was filled with food Craig could not possibly eat. But would I ever trade my responsibilities? Certainly not. Every day I get up and my silent promise is that I will put one foot in front of the other, and I will continue to share this journey with Craig. What would I do different today? Quite a few things. I would not have acquiesced during our conversations about Craig's health. I too can be bullheaded. I would have taken better care of myself during the last year and a half. I would answer all the calls and emails to let the senders know how much they matter. On many days, they were all that got me dressed. I would take time to paint and garden. My word of advice is that unless your cancer is completely mundane, get yourself to the nearest inner city teaching hospital. Focus on getting well first, bills later. Actually, I developed a form letter for appeals with a great measure of success. Don't base a prognosis for yourself or your loved one based on what you read on the web. Since Craig's initial diagnosis, I have not Googled the term colon cancer once. Actually, I have not Googled the term cancer once. Don't feel guilty about the opportunities we have, but do think later on about whether you have the time and energy to advocate for a better healthcare system in the US. I think everyone should have the opportunities that we have had. Healthcare includes self-care, and mental health is part of it. Like I said, there is no shame in that. This is where we are today. This is not the real ending. This is just a place where I stop telling our story. Thank you.
So Marion, thank you. I can say quite simply that I think this whole thing has been harder on Marion than it has been on me. And I regret what it has done to Marion much more than I regret what it has done to me. God, I wish I had done several things differently. So after action report, how did I get to stage 4 colorectal cancer before anybody figured it out? First of all, I didn't have cancer on my radar as a likely health risk. I knew what my family's health history was. I had several things on the radar as things to worry about, and I paid a lot of attention to them. In all known history of my family, there are only 2 cases of cancer recorded, both associated with tobacco use. One of my great-grandmothers chewed snuff, and she was a tough old lady. Because it was socially unacceptable for a lady to chew snuff, her solution was to swallow the tobacco juice. And she actually survived stomach cancer as a result of that. And I had a grandfather who was a very heavy smoker and died of lung cancer when I was just a kid. So, cancer was just something I didn't think about. In 2011, I was a candidate to be a live kidney donor, and I was checked head to toe, including a head to toe CT scan, because if you give somebody a kidney, you don't want to give them a case of cancer with the kidney. It turns out that my kidney wasn't needed, but 2011, I was clean as a whistle. I should not have been as sick as I was in February 17 by all rights. I run a lot, chronically fit. I made a mistake of failing to distinguish between being fit and being healthy, because there were clearly, in retrospect, months, if not years in there where I was fit but unhealthy. I ate a vegan and fish diet since 2003. Nothing in my diet heavy on red meat and cheese and the sort of things you associate with colorectal cancer. And I didn't have most of the typical symptoms that go with colorectal cancer. In fact, didn't have any weight loss. My hemoglobin levels were fine. Just didn't fit. I fell into a relationship with my personal care physician that didn't work for me, and on top of that, healthcare professionals didn't do everything they might have done. I saw half a dozen primary care physicians at one point or another during the, 3-4 years when my cancer was probably developing. Not one of them recommended one of the non-invasive stool tests that are actually recommended as a test for anybody over 50 once a year. If somebody had said, do this, and I had done it, my cancer would have been detected a lot earlier than it was. I have a stupidly high pain tolerance. I'm a really good long distance runner. I'm really good at 50-mile races and I'm not very good at marathons, but somewhere between 23 and 50 miles, your pain tolerance becomes more important than how fast you are. So things that might have hurt, things that I might have noticed, I just didn't. I am almost comically colorblind, and there's a really interesting paper available through PubMed that shows that men that are colorblind, men that are red-green colorblind, systematically self-detect colon cancer later than men that see colors properly. And the answer is, the reason for this is very simple. If you're red-green colorblind, everything in the toilet just looks brown. So I had a little bit of genetic predisposition for not detecting things early. And I was embarrassed. For one of very few times in my life, I blinked. I was embarrassed. I realized in retrospect that I was going to the bathroom a lot per day, and I just sort of blamed myself. And I noticed that my workouts weren't right. I didn't feel good about my running workouts, and I was just too embarrassed to go to my wife or my doctor and say, hey, does this seem right to you? And in retrospect, what I clearly now can identify as symptoms of colorectal cancer, I wrote off either to stress or just ignored. And what I learned personally out of this, I didn't get sick because I worked a lot. But working a lot without taking time to comprehensively and regularly address my health and check my health let my cancer get along much farther than it would have otherwise. And working a lot gave me an excuse to rationalize away my symptoms. One of the things I learned is, boy, there's no sense being embarrassed about bodily functions. And in fact, one of the things that I've learned since I got sick is that in Ayurvedic approaches to medicine, a body's input and output processes are considered to be really an essential part of a person's health. I learned that fear is worse than grappling with a problem. There were at least a few weeks in there before Marion sat me down and said we need to talk, where I was afraid that something was wrong with me, and I was afraid of knowing. And I learned that, cancer really sucks. Cancer is just horrible. It's horrible physically, it is worse emotionally. But I will say that it's worse for many other people than it is for me. I've been asked, aren't you outraged about this? Aren't you mad about this? And my answer is always, I'm outraged when I go up to get my chemo and what I see in the room next to me is a 15-year-old whose chemo is clearly not working. That bothers me. What helped? Cards, phone calls, texts, email messages, hugs, care packages, some with very practical gifts, some with completely impractical and silly gifts. Support from my wife, support from my family, support from my colleagues, support from my professional community, support from friends, from religious communities. The one thing that wasn't very helpful was having people just sort of pat me on the back and say, you got this, because I sure as anything did not got this. It had me, and it was really my medical care team and my wife and my family that got me through it. So, so here we are. We're part of the IT workforce, and in particular, one of the topics that I think about a lot specifically is the cyberinfrastructure workforce, the people who work in support of research everywhere, and there are too few of us. We are too few, we're too stressed, and stress is a strong risk factor in all sorts of diseases. I said at the beginning of the talk that I've lost 2 close colleagues to heart attacks, 2 close colleagues to colon cancer. Certainly, stress was a factor in all of those deaths. Sitting is a risk factor, and let's face it, a lot of us do a lot of sitting and listening to conference calls, sitting and typing. The standard American diet is a risk factor. The amount of sugar in our diet is a risk factor in all manner of diseases, and I have become a very, very careful label reader. And I'm just stunned by the amount of sugar in some foods. At one point I was in the grocery store and I picked up a can of pickled herrings, which I figured was a good proteiny, low sugar kind of thing to eat. And I go to put it in the grocery basket and Marion says, put that back. And I said, why? And she said, well, it's full of sugar. And look at it. Can of pickled herring has more sugar in it than can of Coke. And I really have worked specifically to reduce my risk of recurrence of cancer, but just in terms of my general health, to really cut down the amount of carbs and sugar that are in my diet. And we ought to recognize, all of us, that health in the US in general isn't getting better right now. And in fact, in some demographic categories, life expectancies are actually right now decreasing. And the stats are really kind of shocking. Cancer and heart attack rates are declining, but rates of death from cancer and heart attacks are going up. There is a whole genre of literature along the theme, I am too young to be as sick as I am with colorectal cancer. There's a great book entitled Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved, written by a professor at Duke University who was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer in her 30s. Colon cancer incidence is on the rise in people at younger and younger ages. Diabetes is rising drastically, and that and sugar intake, as I said, big risk factor. And I think it's important for us to understand, according to the medical research and the stats, each one of us will develop cancer roughly 6 times in our lifetime. But for 50–60% of us, our immune system will beat cancer back each one of those 6 times, and we'll never know we have cancer. What happened to me is that I'm in the category of people who had cancer n+1 times developed in their body and had their immune system beat it back only n times. So we are, as IT professionals, we are part of a high-risk community in a country that right now is facing increasing incidence of disease and, in some demographic categories, declining health. So to try to turn this around and think about what we in general can do to be good to ourselves and take care of ourselves, first of all, assume that nobody but you is in charge of your health care. Your primary care physician simply is not allowed the time to keep track of your health care comprehensively. Either you do it or nobody does it. In particular, I recommend that all of us get all of the tests that are recommended by the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. The URL for that list is in the paper. It's a long list of tests, and I would say, if I had it to do all over again, more testing is definitely something I would have done that would have caught my cancer much earlier than it had been caught. Common sense health advice: exercise. If you smoke, quit. Try to get your weight and girth to or close to AMA recommendations. Consider giving up the standard American diet. It's got the acronym SAD for a reason, and the standard American diet and the amount of sugar in it is one of the factors contributing to the general decline of health in the US right now. Consider taking a formal approach to planning for your health and happiness, and in particular, I recommend the book Your Best Year Ever, because it plans for all the things that we all know about. We've all read Covey, we've all read David Allen. The difference between those self-help books and Your Best Year Ever is that Your Best Year Ever makes planning for your happiness and planning for your health part of your annual planning process. It has very, very useful and specific techniques for converting I'm going to improve my health someday to I'm going to improve my health this year to I'm going to improve my health this quarter to I'm going to start doing things this month and this week that will improve my health. Actually, if there's one recommendation that anyone follows out of this, it's get this book and apply it to your personal health and personal life. And I should add, by the way, some of you know that I've done work on return on investment in computing. The return on investment in healthcare can be really fantastic. I've lost months of work that I could have avoided or at least reduced drastically with 1 day of concerted effort on my health per year over the past 10 years. Not to mention that my insurance is pretty good, but it goes only so far, and there's a gap that I find noticeable between what my insurance pays for and what my healthcare actually costs. So if you're thinking about this from the standpoint of, boy, I've got all this work I have to do, the consequences of not taking time to manage your health can be really significant. I've learned something out of this, and there are 10 silver linings for me. One is that I reached my target weight for trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon. I was forced to take time to read, listen, and reflect. Care packages, hugs from hot chicks, hugs from hot guys. Increased awareness of how good I really have it. Boy, any trip to the infusion center was just a day-long lesson in how good I really have it. This experience has added a new mission to my life, and this talk is part of that. Health awareness outreach. I've learned to receive and to be more compassionate with myself. Receiving does not come naturally to me, and there have been times where I had no choice but to receive. I have added mindfulness practices to my day, Qigong exercises and journaling in particular. It's been a gut faith on my relationship and with Marion and my family and on my faith. When I was diagnosed, I was not afraid of dying. But for years, I have promised my wife that we would have a good, happy retirement once I hung up my hat as an IT professional. And what I was afraid of more than anything is not keeping those promises. And in point of fact, what's happened to me will cause me to die sooner than if I had not gotten cancer. But it has changed how I spend my days. My mental mantra is, if it's not okay to leave Marion alone at 60, it's also not okay to leave Marion alone at 6 p.m. I'm much more tidy about cleaning up, putting my stuff away, and going home at the end of the workday. This whole thing was a sufficiently hard whack on the side of my head that it forced me to reinvent myself. My values didn't change, but the way that I work my values out and the way I spend my time have certainly changed a lot. So the title of this talk was, Your Good Health is a Workforce Issue, and certainly it is. We are a small, very specialized community in the cyber infrastructure workforce. Learning how to support research computing takes time. We're a group that's very, very important in terms of what we do for the national research community. So the workforce wants you. We want you around as a colleague for a good long time. But recognize that there's a lot more to it than that. Take good care of yourself, be compassionate with yourself and your family. Your family needs you, your friends need you, and after all the work that you have done on behalf of the U.S. research community, by darn, you deserve a long and healthy life in which to do what you want to do after you retire and hang up your hat as a cyber infrastructure and information technology professional. Moving ahead, a couple sources of additional information. On YouTube, this video by David Foster Wallace entitled "This is Water" is just fantastic. It's one of the best 20-minute discussions I've ever heard about how we spend our time and attention. Here we have the cover of the Michael Hyatt book, Your Best Year Ever, which I recommend highly. And then a URL here as well to a website for something called Mind-Body Stress Reduction, which is clinically proven to be useful in reducing stress. So all sources of additional information, as well as many references that are in the paper. This video will be on YouTube in the IUPTI website. The full paper is available at the URL shown here. All the stuff is copywritten, trustees of Indiana University, but released under a reuse with attribution CC by 4.0 license. Acknowledgements and disclaimers. First of all, I want to thank my partner in life and wife, Marion Krefeldt, for keeping me alive. I want to thank the doctors, nurses, staff, and volunteers of the IU Simon Cancer Center and IU Health for keeping me alive. I want to thank all of the people that have supported me through all of this. I do want to mention that neither Marion nor I are an MD. Consult a qualified doctor for advice on your health. And as usual, any opinions expressed here are those of the authors and do not represent necessarily the opinions of any of the organizations that have supported us in this work or in other work. And I do want to very briefly address two questions that I have gotten about my experience so far. One is, if I had it to do all over again, what would I do differently? And I think the thing is, I would be born in a universe where Your Best Year Ever came out the year after Franklin Covey's Habits of Highly Effective People. Because as much as as much attention as I paid to David Allen and Franklin Covey, I think if I had had Your Best Year Ever as a resource earlier on, I would have done a better job planning for my own health care and wouldn't be in this position today. The other question I've gotten is, how has this affected my leadership and my thinking about leadership? And what's happened is that I have become much more careful about the example that I provide. In my early days in leadership, I really had a tremendous amount of time that was available to me to spend on work. Marion and I were empty nesters at 39 when our son left home. We didn't do things in the usual order for academics and children. Then at 41, I was a grandfather. So in my 40s and 50s, I had much more time available to me to spend on work. And I spent it on work, a lot of it. And I recognize in retrospect that this wasn't always the best example for the people that I was working with. So I'm much more careful about working really, really hard when I'm working, and then at some same time in the early evening, shutting my computer, going home and doing something besides work. I am trying to take what I learned out of this and pay it forward a little bit and live my life a little bit more sanely than maybe I have in some years in the past. Thank you very much.